Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. My 45F daughters, 16 and 14, have a strained relationship with my ex-husband's parents, 76M and 78F. My ex, David, passed away in a car crash last September, and we've had some major family drama since due to his cheating and him leaving two boys born with his affair partner orphaned. She also died in the same accident. Part of the drama has been my ex-in-laws, Martha and Gerald, trying to get custody of my daughters and them also trying to move in with us. The custody battle is going to court next month, but living together will never happen. Where we live, there's a Saturday farmers market with fresh produce, eggs, meats, and other products directly from local farms. This past weekend was extra special since it was my youngest daughter Emma's birthday. Since her party is planned for later in the month, I decided to give her a budget and set her loose on the market to get whatever she wanted. Mostly chocolate and those artisanal caramels she loves. "Go wild, but stay within budget," I told her with a smile. "Thanks, Mom." Emma grinned, practically skipping away. After an hour, I started getting worried, and just before I called her, she called me. She was crying, saying some strange people had cornered her. I ran to her with my oldest daughter, Lily, to find 6 older women berating Emma for being unchristian, for refusing to spend time with her paternal grandparents, or for wanting to be a good big sister to her poor orphaned baby brothers. My daughters are the ones who discovered David's cheating and the babies, so they aren't fond of the kids. It's trauma, and they are working with a therapist. "How dare you abandon those poor little boys," one woman with steel gray hair was saying. "The Lord sees your hard heart," another added, wagging her finger at my terrified daughter. I got between the group and Emma, telling Lily to go pay for the stuff her sister had selected and to go to the car. Then I turned to the women, several of whom I recognized from when we attended my ex-in-law's church, and ripped them a new one. "Who do you think you are harassing a teenage girl?" I demanded. "We're simply sharing God's message," one replied sanctimoniously. Martha and Gerald are heartbroken. "You're the worst for refusing to obey your ex-in-laws like a good Christian wife," another said with a sniff. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "My daughters have been through enough without being ambushed by strangers at a farmer's market." Eventually, the screaming grew too loud and we were all asked to leave the market by security. I met with my girls at the car, with the women following me like a pack of vultures. I managed to get in the car and drove away. "Who were those people?" Lily asked, her voice shaking. "Martha's church friends," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "Are you okay, Emma?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "They came out of nowhere, said I was going to hell for not loving my brothers." After my girls went to bed that night, I got online to talk to Mark, another member of that church that I'm on good terms with. I told him about what happened, and after he apologized, he told me what was going on. "Look, I hate to tell you this," Mark said during our video call, "but Martha has been posting some pretty inflammatory stuff about you and the girls. My ex-mother-in-law had posted this massive story in the church's Facebook group about how horrible my daughters and I are, how we are leaving them homeless and penniless, despite the fact they inherited David's personal bank account and his life insurance, and how my daughters don't even talk to them. She also accused us of being the reason she lost her grandsons. The boys are now living with distant cousins of my ex-husband. Basically, it was a sob story worthy of a Lifetime movie. And of course they were getting all the sympathy and support from the more extremist members of their church. This church and its members are a bit annoying, especially with LGBTQ+ topics, but they have one small saving grace. They are incredibly strict about infidelity. It's a major sin, whether committed by a husband or a wife. Now, how did Martha get around blaming me about affair children without exposing the cheating? She claimed the other woman was our surrogate since I was unable to have more children, then said I didn't want the babies because they were boys, which is absolutely disgusting to be accused of. "She said what?" I nearly shouted into the phone. Mark sighed. "I know it's not true, a lot of us do, but Martha is very persuasive with certain people. Well, I decided it was time to clean up this mess. Since I was mid-divorce when David died, I had all the evidence needed. And since the divorce wasn't completed, I don't have any legal ramifications for releasing all the evidence. I was off the next day and went to a print shop to get copies of all the delightful pictures of David cheating, his text conversations with his affair partner Vanessa, the ones with his parents confessing to his cheating and getting support from them, my ex-in-laws harassing me about the divorce, and my coup de grace, all the emails and text messages of them bullying my daughters about their baby brothers. In one of them, they call my daughters bastards, and tell them it was their fault their father died since they told me about the affair and I began the divorce. This one was literally 2 days after David died. I paid extra for all of this to be printed on beautiful high-quality paper. Then when I got home, I sat down for hours to make meticulously personalized binders. They look like the little prayer song packets the church gives for everyone to take to sing hymns. The first picture when opening the binders is David and Vanessa making out in our living room. Their faces are easy to discern, and Vanessa looks nothing like me, different skin tones and hair color. Underneath, I wrote, David and Vanessa's love story. I took them to the church before Sunday service. There's a desk in the back with the songbooks for people who need or forget their own and they never check them. "What are you doing?" Lily had asked when she saw me assembling the binders. "Telling the truth," I replied simply. The gossip mill was quick and harsh. The names David and Vanessa got called in the Facebook group were so bad the pastor himself had to get involved just to keep things relatively PG-13. People were angry at Martha and Gerald for their abuse toward my daughters, but what made me laugh was that I was still technically in the wrong for the divorce, but it is understandable that Megan failed in her duties after the shock, and she possibly will one day return to the light, unlike her cheating husband and his Jezebel. They used another word I can't use here, I imagine. I got 2 apology letters in the mail for my girls and an invitation to join the church for support. "Mom, someone from the church called to say sorry," Emma told me 3 days later. "They said Grandma Martha has been lying to everyone." "Good," I replied. "Sometimes the truth needs to come out." As for my ex-in-laws, they got shamed into leaving the church. Martha made a post on her wall about how alienated she feels and how no one cares for the elderly anymore. How she wished her great son was still alive since he would have taken care of her and Gerald. With what money, I don't know, since I was the primary breadwinner. "Did you see Martha's latest post?" Mark texted me last week. "She's playing the victim again." "Some things never change," I replied. Explanation on the will. David had a will that named his parents as beneficiaries. As far as I was aware, he had told me he had named our daughters, not them. I never pushed for me to be the beneficiary, as my own will has my daughters as the beneficiaries, not him. The next one is an entitled people story. I need to start this story by saying I'm a licensed architect with over 15 years of experience designing residential and commercial buildings. I've won awards for my work. I know building codes, zoning laws, and architectural standards inside and out. This becomes important later. My wife and I bought a 5-acre property in a planned community about 3 years ago. The neighborhood was nice enough, with larger lots and a pretty relaxed HOA compared to the horror stories you hear about. Or so I thought. The covenants were reasonable when we reviewed them before purchasing. Standard stuff about maintaining your property, no junk cars visible from the street, that kind of thing. There was a section about architectural review for new structures, but it just required submitting plans 30 days before construction. Nothing about specific approval being needed. We loved the property because it had enough space for me to finally build the workshop barn I'd been dreaming about for years. I'm into woodworking and restoration projects, and our old place had a tiny garage that barely fit 1 car. This property was perfect. I spent months designing the barn. This wasn't some thrown-together shed. I created a beautiful post and beam structure with a stone foundation, cedar siding, and a standing seam metal roof. The design incorporated traditional barn aesthetics, but with clean, modern lines. I made sure every single measurement, every structural element, and every material choice exceeded local building codes. I pulled all the proper permits from the county. I submitted my plans to the HOA exactly 31 days before breaking ground as required by the covenants. I never heard a word back from them. The covenants didn't require approval, just submission. So after the 30 days passed, I started construction. I hired a great crew and we built that barn in about 6 weeks. It turned out even better than my drawings. The stone foundation matched the stone accents on our house. The cedar was top grade, and I'd designed the roof line to complement the architecture of our home. Several neighbors stopped by during construction to compliment the work. 2 days after we finished, I got a letter from the HOA. The letter informed me that my barn violated the neighborhood's aesthetic standards and needed to be removed or substantially modified. I was stunned. I read through the covenants again, carefully. There was nothing about aesthetic standards beyond keeping your property maintained and free of eyesores. My barn was beautiful and well-maintained. It wasn't visible from most of the neighborhood due to the property's natural landscape and tree coverage. I called the HOA president, a guy who lived 4 houses down. He told me the barn was too large, too industrial looking, and didn't match the neighborhood's upscale character. I pointed out that my barn was smaller than several of the massive garages in the neighborhood, was built with premium materials, and had been designed by a licensed architect using the same architectural language as the existing homes. I also reminded him that I'd submitted plans and heard nothing back. He said the architectural review committee had been inactive when I submitted, so my submission had gone unreviewed. He claimed that didn't matter because the structure clearly violated the spirit of the covenants. When I asked him to point to the specific covenant I was violating, he got huffy and said I'd be hearing from the HOA's attorney. Sure enough, a week later, I received a letter from a lawyer threatening daily fines if I didn't submit a remediation plan within 30 days. The letter claimed my structure violated Section 12, subsection C of the covenants, which stated that all structures must maintain harmony with existing neighborhood architecture and may not negatively impact property values or neighborhood character. I read that section about 50 times. It was the vaguest, most subjective language possible, but it technically did exist. I'd glossed over it during my initial review because it seemed like standard boilerplate that would only apply to genuinely offensive structures. I wasn't about to tear down a barn I'd spent months designing and tens of thousands of dollars building, but I also didn't want to rack up daily fines or get into a costly legal battle, so I decided to play their game. I requested a meeting with the Architectural Review Committee. The HOA president grudgingly scheduled one. I showed up with my architect's license, my portfolio, copies of my permits, photos of the barn from multiple angles, and a detailed analysis I'd prepared. The committee consisted of the HOA president and 2 other board members. I walked them through everything. I showed them how my barn used the same stone, similar color palettes, and complementary roof lines as houses in the neighborhood. I pointed out that it met or exceeded all building codes. I provided property value data showing that well-built outbuildings typically increase property values, not decrease them. The HOA president barely looked at my materials. He said the barn needed to be painted a different color, the roof line needed modification, and it needed landscaping screening to make it less visible. When I asked what specific color, what specific modifications, and what specific landscaping, he said I needed to submit a new plan that better matched neighborhood standards. That's when I realized what was actually happening. The HOA president had a massive, cheaply built metal garage on his property that he'd put up before we moved in. It was visible from the street, painted a garish beige, and honestly looked terrible compared to most structures in the neighborhood. Several people had complained about it on the neighborhood Facebook page over the years. My beautiful barn was making his ugly garage look even worse by comparison. He wasn't going to approve anything I proposed. He wanted me to tear it down or spend a fortune fighting him. But he'd made a critical mistake. He'd demanded I make my structure better match neighborhood standards and maintain harmony with existing architecture. I went home and reread the covenants one more time, taking careful notes. Then I spent an entire weekend walking through the neighborhood with my camera, measuring tape, and notebook. I documented everything. Here's what I found. The covenants required architectural harmony, but they defined no standards. There were no approved color palettes, no prohibited materials, no size restrictions beyond county setback requirements. The neighborhood had a wild variety of architectural styles. There were ranches, contemporaries, craftsman-style homes, and even one pseudo-Victorian. Garage and outbuilding colors ranged from white to gray to beige to brown to dark green. Some had metal roofs, some had shingle. Some were visible from the street, some weren't. More importantly, I identified at least 6 properties with violations more obvious than anything they could claim about my barn. The HOA president's garage was the worst, but there was also a neighbor with a bright blue shed clearly visible from the street, another with a deteriorating boat storage structure, and one property with a home addition that didn't match the original house at all. I prepared my remediation plan very carefully. I hired a professional photographer to take magazine-quality photos of my barn from every angle. Then I hired the same photographer to take identical quality photos of every single structure in the neighborhood, including all the violations I documented. My remediation plan was 50 pages long. It included, first, a detailed architectural analysis showing that my barn incorporated design elements from at least 15 different properties in the neighborhood, making it perfectly harmonious with existing architecture. I'd literally borrowed stone details from one house, roof pitches from another, window styles from a third, and so on. I showed specific measurements and photos proving this. Second, a comprehensive survey of all outbuilding colors in the neighborhood, demonstrating that the cedar brown I'd used fell exactly in the middle of the neighborhood's existing color spectrum. I included paint chip comparisons. Third, a landscaping plan that proposed screening similar to what existed at other properties with visible outbuildings. But here was the key part, and this is where the malicious compliance came in. I noted that to fully comply with Section 12, subsection C, regarding neighborhood harmony and aesthetic standards, I would need the HOA to first enforce these standards uniformly across all properties. I included detailed documentation of every violation I'd found with photos, measurements, and specific covenant citations. I stated that I couldn't reasonably be expected to modify my structure to match undefined neighborhood standards while more egregious violations remained unaddressed. I noted that selective enforcement would be discriminatory and potentially legally problematic for the HOA. Therefore, I proposed that the HOA either approve my structure as is or commit to enforcing the aesthetic standards equally by requiring all documented violations to be remediated before addressing my barn. I submitted this plan with a formal request that it be reviewed at the next HOA board meeting, which was open to all residents per the bylaws. I also emailed a copy to every board member and CC'd the HOA's attorney. The board meeting was 3 weeks later. I showed up early and sat in the front row. About 20 other residents were there, which was unusual. Apparently, word had gotten around that something interesting was happening. The HOA president looked extremely uncomfortable when the architectural review item came up on the agenda. He tried to table the discussion, but another board member insisted they address it since I'd submitted everything properly and requested a public review. I was invited to present my plan. I went through it methodically, using a projector to show my photos and analyses. I stayed professional and calm. I explained how I designed the barn to harmonize with neighborhood architecture. I showed the color analysis. I presented the landscaping plan. Then I got to the violations section. I put up photo after photo of structures that clearly violated the same vague aesthetic standards they were trying to enforce against me. I showed my measurements and documentation. I noted that my barn exceeded the quality and design standards of most of these structures. The room got very quiet. Several residents were staring at the screen, then at the HOA president, then back at the screen. I concluded by reiterating my position. Approve my barn or commit to uniform enforcement of aesthetic standards across all properties. The HOA president's face was red. He started to say something about my barn being different, but another board member cut him off. This board member, a woman who'd always seemed reasonable, asked the HOA president directly if the Architectural Review Committee had reviewed any other structures for aesthetic compliance in the past 5 years. He admitted they hadn't. She asked if he'd received any complaints about my barn from residents other than himself. He admitted he hadn't. She asked if he'd documented specific aesthetic standards before demanding I modify my structure. He said the standards were obvious and didn't need documentation. She pointed out that according to my presentation, they clearly weren't obvious since the neighborhood had wildly varying styles and no documented standards. The discussion went on for another 30 minutes. Several residents spoke up. 2 said they'd driven by specifically to see my barn after hearing about the controversy, and both said it was beautiful and well built. 1 mentioned that they'd been thinking about building a similar structure and were now worried about arbitrary enforcement. Another pointed out that the HOA president's own garage violated his supposed aesthetic standards far more than my barn did. The board eventually took a vote. 2 members voted to approve my barn as is with no modifications required. The HOA president voted against. The vote passed, but it got better. The reasonable board member who'd asked the pointed questions made a motion that the board develop clear, written architectural standards within 6 months, and that until those standards were documented and voted on by the membership, no aesthetic enforcement actions would be taken except for genuine eyesores like abandoned vehicles or severe property neglect. The motion passed with the same votes split. Then she made another motion requiring the HOA president to recuse himself from all architectural review decisions going forward due to clear bias and conflict of interest. That motion also passed. The HOA president resigned from the board 2 months later. Apparently, several residents had filed complaints about his selective enforcement attempts and general mismanagement. The new president was the reasonable board member who'd backed me up at the meeting. As for my barn, it's still standing exactly as I built it. I added some nice landscaping around it because I'd planned to anyway, but nothing was required. My property value actually increased significantly, partly because of the barn and partly because the real estate market improved, but definitely not because the barn hurt values like the old HOA president claimed. The neighborhood did eventually adopt clear architectural standards, but they were reasonable and well-defined. My barn met every single one of them, which wasn't surprising since I'd helped consult on developing the standards. The best part happened about a year later. The old HOA president put his house up for sale. The listing mentioned the property included a large storage garage, but when the professional real estate photos went online, his cheap metal garage looked so bad compared to everything else that he ended up taking down those photos and only showing the house itself. He eventually had to repaint the entire garage a less offensive color before the house would sell. I still use my barn several times a week for woodworking projects. It's become a bit of a landmark in the neighborhood. Several residents have stopped by to see it and ask questions about the design. 3 neighbors have asked me to design similar structures for their properties. I've done 2 of them so far, both approved by the new Architectural Review Committee without any issues. Sometimes when I'm working in the barn, I think about how the old HOA president tried to force me to tear down something I'd designed and built correctly, just because his ego couldn't handle someone else having something nicer than what he had. His attempt to selectively enforce vague rules backfired completely. He ended up exposing problems with the entire HOA enforcement system, losing his position, and eventually having to fix his own building before he could sell his house. All because I gave them exactly what they asked for. Proof that my structure matched neighborhood standards and a plan for uniform enforcement. Malicious compliance at its finest. The next one is a petty revenge story. This might be the pettiest I have behaved ever, but this person deserved it. Anyway, enjoy reading. So I have this part-time on-campus job as a front desk proctor at one of the dorms at northeastern Boston. Basically, I sit there, check IDs, and let residents and their guests in. It's a pretty straightforward job. The setup is simple. There's a desk in the middle, an entry door on my left, an exit on my right, and the card reader is on my right side of the desk. The normal process is people walk up to the front of the desk, show their ID, I tap it and let them in. It takes about 30 seconds and everyone does it this way, except this one girl. She decides standing at the front is too much work, I guess, so she walks past the entire front desk and stands on my left side near the entrance, expecting me to turn completely around, take her card, turn back to my right to tap it, then turn around again to give it back. She did this a couple of times, and I was already annoyed, but whatever, I was busy with my own work and didn't want to deal with it. But then she comes back later with her friend, putting on this fake accent, trying to impress them, and does the same thing again. Her friend is standing at the front desk, all confused like a normal person, and quietly asks, "Are we allowed to stand here?" And this girl literally says with full attitude, "Yeah, it's more convenient for me to stand here." That's when I lost it internally. I took both their cards, signed them in, and instead of turning around to hand them back like she expected, I straight up slammed both cards on the far right end of the desk. Complete opposite side from where she was standing. Gave them a dead stare and went back to my laptop like I didn't give a duck. Her friend had to awkwardly walk all the way around to grab the cards while Miss Convenient stood there processing what just happened. If it's convenient for you to make me turn around, then it's convenient for me to make you walk around. Simple as that. Sometimes you gotta give people a reality check without saying a word. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I recently found this sub, and I think I have a great story for it. This happened about 2 years ago. I work in construction, but more specifically, I cut concrete. A lot of people aren't familiar with my job, but all you really need to know is that I don't pour any concrete. I use big diesel and hydraulic-powered saws to cut and remove it. I work at a relatively small company, 15 employees, and we are the company to use for concrete cutting and removal in our area. I was the first employee hired at this company, and my bosses are amazing. They have been in the industry for 25 and 30 years, respectively. We will call them Brad and Cody. They know what they are doing, and they still get out and work in the field, and will outwork any of our employees. We were awarded a no-bid contract at a very large facility to cut and remove a very large section of their outdoor slab because it had cracked. This was routine for us. We could do it in our sleep, but it was still a large project. The reason we were given the contract but not held to a number was because they wanted it done right and fast, and they knew that we were they guys to do this, even though we aren't always the cheapest. The customer requested us to bring extra equipment and specialized saws, just in case. Important later. The day comes that we are supposed to start, and they wanted us on site at 6:30 a.m. for a safety meeting. Brad and Cody went out while I stayed back to get my crews ready for the day before heading out to meet them. When I arrived at 8 a.m., they were still standing by their trucks just talking. I asked them how the safety meeting went, and they said that no one had shown up yet. Finally, they got there at around 9 a.m. and didn't even acknowledge that they were late. We met the guy that was in charge of the project. His name was John. John said during the safety meeting that there would always be a few people around from his company to watch us while we worked. We figured it was weird, but no big deal. We ran a routine safety meeting after, and it was time to work. We got about a third of the project completed in one day. The entire time we were working there were no less than 25 people standing around watching us work. We kept joking with them to just set up bleachers. It would be easier to watch that way. They made us call it quits at 4 p.m. so they could go home. Right about this time, we started to figure there was something up with these guys. They didn't care that we didn't get started until late and wanted us to end early, yet a big part of us being there was to get it done fast. Either way, we figured we would still be able to get done in about 3 days and make record time for a project of this size, all while making a fair amount of money for ourselves. The next morning, as we were getting ready to head out for their day, Brad received an email. It said, "While we can tell that X company are master operators with their machines, we feel as if they are operating in an unsafe manner by running multiple machines at once and request that they slow down to maintain safe working conditions. They also didn't try to make sure our supervisors felt that they were safe throughout the day." Brad was pissed. We were called in to get things done fast, and not once had we done a single thing that could be considered unsafe. When we got to the job that day for the safety meeting, Brad had changed from "screw these guys, they don't know anything about what we are doing" to "okay, we are too fast, we will slow it right down for them." At the safety meeting, John, same guy who sent us the email, looked at us and said, "Okay, everyone knows what we are doing, let's get it done." He tried to end the safety meeting with that, but that's when my boss spoke up. He said, "Hold on, since no one is man enough to tell us in person and just want to hide behind their emails, let's get this straight. We are too fast and unsafe for you?" John became visibly uncomfortable and stammered out, "Well, there was a lot of people standing around and watching you yesterday, and I just felt that someone would get hurt if they decided to get closer to watch." I had set up safety cones with red danger tape strung between it and told no one to cross. We had taken proper safety precautions. If they didn't feel comfortable to have that many people watch, then don't have that many people standing, watching, and doing nothing. All Brad said was, "Okay, we will be real slow, and if someone crosses our line, we shut the site down for an hour for another safety meeting." Time for the malicious compliance we started up for the day. Something to note about our saws, tractors, and other heavy equipment is that we have the ability to turn up the idle, or in other words, we can turn up or down the speed of the motors, so instead of everything moving normally and how it should, which is fast, everything is moving at turtle speed. Brad told us all that if we ever sped up our machines that he would kick us off the job, even Cody, his business partner. I was cutting with our saw while Cody was in the excavator to remove the pieces that I cut. Brad was in the skid steer to haul the pieces to the dump truck. I would cut the concrete into a 6x6 piece, which would normally take me about 20-30 minutes. It was taking upwards of 3 hours for one piece. After I would cut, Cody in the excavator would turn his machine on, slowly turn and stop, extend his bucket. Stop, lower the bucket. Stop, tilt the bucket. Stop, pick up the piece. Stop, turn, stop, drop the piece. Stop, shut off his machine. All without idling up. Then Brad would start his machine and repeat the same process to load into the dump truck. You get the point. It was painfully slow. After the first piece was ready to be pulled out and Cody started the process, John, who was just sitting on the sideline pale-faced, crossed my line to ask if we were really serious. At that point, Brad screamed, "Shut down!" and we all stepped away for an hour for a safety meeting. John crossed the line 3 times in the first day and 8 times total throughout the project. His employees never once crossed the danger line. Effectively, John was the only one he should have been worried about in his email about getting too close and being in danger. John kept saying, "No way you guys are being serious. What happened to what you were doing yesterday? You were so much more efficient." Brad just said, "I have in writing that you felt unsafe, so for the remainder of this project we will be operating at a safe pace." It ended up taking us 3 weeks to finish at that horribly slow pace instead of 3 or 4 days at full speed. The best part? The head of the facility came out to see what was taking us so long. We showed him the email and he agreed with what we were doing. He told us he hates John and that he's insufferable to work around. He said that the success of this project is directly tied to John's yearly bonus. He asked how much we were charging them and we told him that per piece of equipment and truck, and saw that as one, the site is being billed to them by the hour, and that John had requested that we have nearly double the amount of equipment than we actually needed or used. The facility head just laughed and said, "Fantastic, I will make sure you are paid in full, don't go easy on us with the bill." That's how we maliciously complied our way into charging about $200,000 for a job that should have realistically only been worth about $45,000. I even got a solid $20,000 bonus because Brad and Cody are fantastic bosses and knew we made a killing on that job. Update: I felt like I wanted to clarify a couple of things after reading the comments. First, yes, John tried to get us to go back to our previous working rate, but he would only ever verbally ask. My boss kept telling him, "I need that in writing and you have a deal, hell might even save yourself some money while you're at it." But John either never understood what he was implying or really didn't want to send an email recanting his statement, believing he would look dumb for making a mistake. Second, this was a big project, bigger than what my part in it was. That being said, with how John was with us, I would seriously doubt every other aspect of the job went smooth for him. I bet they ended up with some profit, but not nearly as much as they would have without John, meaning he still probably got a bonus, just a very small one. Third, how did they have so many people able to stand around and watch for 3 weeks and not work? Well, by the end of the third week, there was probably only 10 people watching us by then. But this was a facility that has hundreds of people working there, so for 25 people at a time to sneak out for most of a day to watch us wasn't too big of a deal for them. They usually rotated, and if we saw someone one day, then we didn't usually see them again for about a week. Also, just another little satisfying part of the story I should have included was that Cody has had a saying since the very first time I worked with him. He says, "We aren't trying to retire off of this one single job. We are treating the customer fair, but fair isn't always cheap." After the facility head gave us the go-ahead to charge what was needed and not take it easy, Cody looked at us and said, "Yep, we are retiring off of this one." Obviously, it was more of a joke, but the satisfaction I got from hearing him say that after knowing him for 10 years to be the guy who is extra fair will never be rivaled. Anyway, thank you for watching.